here to do part 2 of the Q&A. There were so many questions asked by you guys, and I talked a lot in the first Q&A. I have a feeling I'm going to be doing the same thing with this one because there are a few questions that need longish answers. So there may even be a part 3 to this Q&A, longest Q&A in history, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get through all of the questions that are still remaining today, but I'll do my best. First question I'll start off with is, what have you done differently this time for IVF? There were a few different things I did differently. The fertility specialist that I changed to recommended I take a few different supplements that I wasn't taking before. So one of them was vitamin E, 1000 IUs daily, ubiquinol, which is the purest form of CoQ10. It is also a bit more expensive, and I've heard that it is quite expensive in America. So CoQ10 is just as good, but you do need a higher dose of CoQ10. So I was on 300 milligrams of ubiquinol a day. My fertility specialist said the equivalent is 600 milligrams of CoQ10. So before I was on ubiquinol, I was actually on CoQ10, and I had to take quite a few a day to reach that 600 milligram dose. Another thing that I was told to take, and I was prescribed this, was melatonin. It's really good for the mitochondria of the eggs and the cells, good for egg health basically. Melatonin is something our body produces naturally and makes us sleepy at night, so that is to be taken at night. It was 4 milligrams. As I've mentioned in my previous videos, it made me really sleepy, which is to be expected. I don't have trouble sleeping as it is, so taking extra melatonin just knocked me right out. You can get melatonin here in Australia off the shelf, but it's very minuscule amounts, not enough to make a difference. So 4 milligrams is what I was prescribed. Those 3 things were the things that were added by my fertility specialist. I continued taking prenatal vitamins, and of course, because I discovered I have an MTHFR gene mutation, I am no longer taking a prenatal with folic acid because my body is unable to absorb the folic acid. So I'm taking a natural form, which isn't the synthetic folic acid. So those were the main changes. What has this new clinic, new specialist done differently? She did quite a few things differently. Totally different protocol. My last 2 IVF cycles, I was on an antagonist cycle, where you do IVF basically off your natural cycle. This time, this 3rd IVF cycle, I did the long down reg protocol, which is where you're on the pill for 2 to 3 weeks, and then the idea is the pill suppresses all of your hormones, makes sure all of your follicles are really small and all at the same size when you begin stims. And start to stimulate the ovaries, all the follicles. So the idea, the hope behind that is all of the follicles will start off at the same size, grow at a similar rate, and hopefully you'll have more mature eggs at time of egg collection. And so yes, this IVF cycle we got 15 mature eggs, the most we've ever got. My previous 2 cycles, my first IVF cycle I got 9 mature eggs, and the second there were 11 mature eggs, so this was a few more. My previous IVF cycles, the stim medication that I was on was Puregon. This time I was on Menopur, so something totally different, and I did respond really well on it. Another thing we did differently was PGS testing on our embryos, which is something I wanted to do anyway. It was something I wanted to do from the beginning of our IVF journey for the first IVF cycle, but was told it wasn't necessary. So that wasn't really something that my fertility specialist suggested. She did suggest it, but it was something that I had already been thinking about. And obviously being tested for natural killer cells, that was something that was had been on my mind for a while as well, and I had asked to be tested for that by my previous specialist, but he kind of dismissed it as being a relevant thing to be tested for, and so my fertility specialist actually suggested it before I did when we went to see her back in March. And as you guys know, my natural killer cells in my uterus are elevated, so I'm going to be treated for that as well. Do you have a frozen embryo transfer schedule yet? No, not as yet. We do plan on transferring our one PGS normal healthy embryo in August, so not far away really. This coming week is going to be July, which is just crazy. Can't quite believe that. So August is going to be here soon enough, and I'm just going to spend between now and then getting my body in the best possible health and researching what I need to be doing in regards to preventing another miscarriage. I have been researching intralipid treatment. My fertility specialist has yet to get back to me to discuss that. But yeah, just doing that kind of research and trying to educate myself about what I should be doing, because we have one known healthy embryo and I don't want to stuff it up. I want to make sure we're doing everything right. How do you cope emotionally with getting AF or cycle day 1? Any tips on how to ease the disappointment would be great. At the beginning of our TTC journey, which was early to mid 2014, I had no idea what was in store. We conceived very quickly in our 3rd month of trying, which I was thrilled about, and then had a missed miscarriage at 9 weeks 4 days. Totally took us by surprise. We weren't expecting it at all. And then following the D&C in October 2014, we then tried for a year, for 12 months with no pregnancy. I knew something was wrong. I knew something wasn't right. We'd conceived so easily and quickly in the past, and my gut feeling was telling me something was wrong. But those 12 months of trying after that miscarriage, all I wanted was to be pregnant again when I miscarried that baby. And to have 12 months go by when we'd been told by our fertility specialist, oh, you're always more fertile after a miscarriage, it'll happen quickly, and each month went by and it was negative pregnancy test after negative. My gosh, it was one of the hardest years. It's crazy that 2015 we had no pregnancy at all, and then 2016 we had 5 pregnancies and 5 losses. So it was 1 year of absolute no pregnancy and really feeling that pain that infertility brings you, and that, you know, cycle day 1 brings, when you hold on to that hope each month and then your period comes and all of your hopes just come crashing down, and it's so hard. To go from that year to a year of pregnancy and getting the BFPs finally, but miscarrying each time, it was one extreme to another. It was, both years were equally terrible in different ways. One thing I was doing at the beginning of that year after the first miscarriage was getting really excited each month, as you do, and working out, oh, if I get pregnant this month, I'll be due in December, or I'll be due in January. And that, I think, makes it harder when the cycle fails, when, you know, all that you'd hoped and you'd imagined welcoming this baby in this month. And I think that wasn't healthy for me, and that didn't help me in any way. So I did stop doing that after a few months. I also stopped testing. The earliest I ever tested was 10 DPO, and I got really good at being more strict with not testing as much, because it gets very expensive. Not only that, but it's just so emotionally exhausting, waking up each morning and just praying that there's going to be a line, and doing that month after month after month after month. It's so, only someone who's been through it will really understand what that's like and how emotionally challenging it is. I guess at the time I tried to remind myself that this cycle failed for a reason, my baby is coming, but it's just not meant to be this cycle, and if it's not meant to be next cycle, that's fine. It will happen when it's meant to happen, but that's easier said. It's not quite easy to accept in the moment. It's really hard for me to give advice because it's such a hard one. I guess reminding yourself that all of the heartbreak and disappointments are just a part of the journey, and it is getting you closer to the cycle that will eventually be a success and bring you your baby. I know of a beautiful lady on Instagram who planned something special for herself for when cycle day 1 arrives, and I think that's a really lovely thing to do, to treat yourself when, you know, it's a hard time, when you realize that the cycle hasn't worked. And I think doing something good for yourself that will make you feel a little bit better, even if it's for a moment, is important. I know it's very personal, but how do you cope with the financial strain of fertility treatments? Has your family supported you financially? IVF is extremely expensive. We've been fortunate enough not to have to get a credit card or need support from family. We've just done a lot of saving. Our first couple of IVF cycles were over a year ago, and we had a break in between IVF 2 and IVF 3. So that gave us an opportunity to save enough money for this cycle. I'm a bit of a saver more than a spender. It's just what I've been brought up to do, I guess. My mum has offered to help us out here and there, but mostly we have just used money for IVF that we've saved. IVF isn't as expensive, I don't believe, in Australia as it is in countries like America. This IVF cycle that we did cost us around $13,000. That's almost $10,000 in US dollars and around $7,700 in pounds. Post egg collection, we also get a refund of around $5,000 from Medicare, which is a public health system in Australia. So that's around $3,800 US dollars and 3,000 pounds. So that helps a lot, obviously, to get that money back. But at the start, you have to pay it all up front. So yeah, it's obviously still a financial burden and cost that is not easy for everyone. We don't get free IVF treatment here in Australia, but we are lucky to have a good health system that allows us to have some money back. Yeah. If this IVF cycle is unsuccessful, what are your next steps? Oh, I'm trying not to think that far in advance. This whole IVF cycle has just been about focusing on one thing at a time and not worrying too much about the distant future. So I try not to think too much about, I mean, it's impossible not to think about your fears and worry that it's going to be unsuccessful, but I guess I'm just trying not to think about it. And I don't think that's living in denial, because we do have a chance. This could be our rainbow baby waiting for us. I'm just trying not to worry about things that I don't have to worry about just yet, if that makes sense. What is the one thing that makes you smile when you're having a rough day? As cheesy as it sounds, coming home to my little family always makes me feel better. Tim always manages to make me smile when I'm feeling like crap. He has a funny sense of humour. Sometimes he totally misses it and he's not funny at all, but most of the time he manages to make me smile. And little Cooper always cheers me up as well. He's such a comfort and a joy, as I said in my previous video. Watching Friends is also a great TV show that never fails. If I'm having a crappy day and just need to smile, need to laugh, we put Friends on, and for years and years and years that's been my go-to, and it just makes you feel better. What is your favourite thing to do together as a couple? Nothing specific comes to mind. It's just the little things, I think. Being from Melbourne, we love good food and coffee, and we often go out for brunch, either just the two of us or catch up with family and friends. I love going out on movie and dinner date. Being winter here, we're currently spending a lot of our nights cuddled up on the couch with Cooper watching Netflix, and it's just those little simple things that, you know, just being in each other's company, really. How do you and Tim deal with people asking, do you want to have kids? When will you have kids? To be honest, we haven't had this question for a while now. It's more, we get this question when we see, you know, some family that we don't necessarily see often, or friends that we don't see often. But obviously we've been quite open about our journey, and the majority of our family and friends know what we're going through. But we have definitely got this question before, and more so at the beginning of our journey. And it's a tough one. It frustrates a lot of couples. A lot of the time it's none of that person's business, and it can be a really difficult question to answer, because it's a question you ask the universe, yourself. When are we going to have a child? When is it going to be our turn? So to have someone else ask you that, something that you don't know the answer to, and it's a really sensitive subject, and it can be tough. I think a lot of the time I've just kind of, you know, smiled politely and said, hopefully soon, you know, when it's meant to happen it will. And try not to get bothered by it too much, because it doesn't do you any favours, as frustrating as it is that people feel like it's their business to ask that question. I think a lot of the time the people who have asked us, it's come from a good, like, it's come from people who mean no harm, and they just don't understand that there are some people out there that don't get the baby that they want straight away, and it's harder for some. Any advice on how to be a support for someone who is currently going through major hurdles trying to get pregnant? I'm very lucky to have friends who are super kind and thoughtful. I often get texts or messages or phone calls asking how we're going, and always willing to lend a listening ear. There have been people in my life who aren't as open to listen, and it's very obvious that the conversation or the topic makes them uncomfortable, especially I found after a miscarriage. And I've even noticed some friends avoid the topic completely just because they don't know what to say, perhaps. They're afraid of upsetting you. But for me, that made it even worse. It wasn't being acknowledged, and it was such a big thing that had happened to me, but it was being ignored. There wasn't even, I'm sorry for your loss and how are you going, and it was just as though it never happened. And that's one of the worst feelings when you lose a pregnancy. I really appreciated the friends and family in our life who have been willing to let us talk about it as much or as little as we want to, and have just been there to lend a listening ear. This question was from a lady who has a son with autism and severe learning difficulties. I wondered how you would both feel and cope if your child was not perfect, and would it make a difference to you? I mean, when you get those 2 lines on a pregnancy test, all a parent wants is for your child to be healthy and to have as few challenges as possible. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, but I think that is every parent's desire, for your child to be in good health. Tim and I would deal with it as well as we could, as you do every challenge that life throws at you. You cope as best you can, and I have a lot of respect for parents out there with children who have medical challenges and learning difficulties, and, you know, are part-time or full-time carers for their children. I can't imagine how difficult that would be. You know, of course we would love our child unconditionally regardless of any medical conditions. What's the best advice you've received on this journey to motherhood? I think I mentioned this in part 1. Live in the moment. I think that is the best advice I've received, especially given how long and draining this journey has been for us. Yeah, live in the moment. I'm naturally a worrier and an overthinker. I do a lot of that, and that does not help in any way to worry about what you can't control. It doesn't help with remaining positive and in a good mental state. So I think live in the moment, just focus on now. It's obviously easier said than done, but I'm doing my best. Next question is, what are your other options if this IVF cycle doesn't work? Would you two ever think about adoption, embryo adoption? Would you do IVF again, surrogacy, or just wait a bit and try again? I'm praying with all my might that this little embryo that we've got will be our take-home baby and we won't have to think about what's next for a while. I mean, we've just finished this 3rd IVF cycle. We've still got an embryo or 2 to transfer, and it's quite overwhelming to think about doing another IVF cycle, and even overwhelming to think about adoption, embryo adoption, surrogacy. They're all not easy decisions to make. They're all very financially straining, emotionally straining. They're not, I don't know. To be honest, I'm just trying to focus, as I said, on one thing at a time. We are trying new things this cycle. We've never done a frozen embryo transfer with a PGS normal embryo. We haven't tried so many treatments that I'm going to be put on this pregnancy or my next pregnancy. There are so many new things that we haven't done before, so I'm not really, I do have a bit of hope for this upcoming cycle, and I guess I'm just trying to keep my mind currently in a positive thinking, hopeful state, rather than what if this goes wrong, what are we going to do, that kind of panic mode headspace, if that makes sense. Are there any comments that you get from others concerning your infertility journey that you find offensive or upsetting, even if hurting you was not the person's original intention? It would really help me to be more aware, since I have people in my own life that are struggling with infertility. I loved this question. I thought it was so thoughtful, and something not many people ask. You know what? Ignorance is everywhere, especially surrounding infertility. People just don't understand if they haven't been through it themselves. The number of times I've heard, just relax, or just stress less, be patient and it'll happen, just go on a holiday, or those kind of comments just infuriate me. It's not that simple for some. Sure, stress can be a contributing factor, and isn't healthy for your body, everyone knows that, but it's not that easy and not that simple for so many, and it's quite insulting to hear people say that to you, as though, oh, it's just something you can do, just stop stressing and it'll happen, just, you know, that's your fault that you haven't become pregnant. And last year I was stressed at work, you know, just regular daily stress, and I became pregnant multiple times. I don't think, for me, stress is obviously not the issue, and for many others it's not either. So that is frustrating. Another one is, you're still young, oh, you've got plenty of time. Hearing that, sure, I get that. I've got more time than other people trying who are older than me, but that doesn't take away from the fact that becoming a mother has been something I've wanted ever since I was little, and I envisioned being a young mum. These last 3 years haven't been easy, and just because I'm young, it doesn't make it any less painful. Sure, I've got more time, but when you want something deep within your soul and it's just not happening for you, it's hard. And to have people say, oh, you're young, kind of dismisses the heartache that you feel. And you just never know. Yes, there are young people who struggle and they have got years to keep trying, but nothing is guaranteed regardless of your age, and I just don't think it's a helpful comment. I guess it's sometimes their way of saying you've still got a chance, there's still hope, you've still got time, and it's always coming from a good place, I guess, but there's something about that I just don't like, that comment. Another massive one is, and I get this question a lot on this channel, why don't you just adopt? And a lot of the time I understand it's coming from people who are genuinely curious. Have you thought about adoption? But quite often it is really, I read those words, why don't you just adopt? And it upsets me, because quite often those comments come when I'm in the middle of a fertility treatment or IVF cycle, or while I'm grieving a loss or miscarriage. And I don't think that comment is helpful during those times, especially when you're not at that, you're not even thinking about that at that point. You're focusing on what you're doing. You're focusing on doing IVF, you're focusing on grieving the loss of your baby, and thinking about adoption, just it's not helpful to suggest that, I guess. There's also a lot of misconception about adoption, and so many people think it's the easy fix. I know I'm not alone in saying that the comment just adopt is something that frustrates many couples going through infertility and struggling to start their family. Adoption is nowhere near an easy process. It is extremely expensive. It is extremely time consuming and can take years and years to get your baby. It's extremely emotionally draining. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. Adoption is an amazing thing, and it's definitely something that we may consider in the future. I've got nothing against adoption. I think it's wonderful, but the thing that annoys me is people seem to think that that's the easy fix. It's even a little bit insulting to people who have gone through the adoption process, I think, because it's not an easy, from what I've heard, I've never obviously been through it, but from what I've heard, it's not an easy path, and it's harder than what a lot of people think. It can take couples years and years and years to save the money for adoption. It's a long process, it's very stressful, very draining. It's of course totally worth the time and energy to adopt a child and bring a child who is in need of a home into your family. All of that stress and struggle and money is all worth it, obviously, in the end. When you adopt a child, it is one of the most special things I think you can do, but it needs to be understood that it's not an easy alternative to having your own biological child. It's not a helpful suggestion, and a lot of the time couples who have been struggling to have a baby probably have thought about it. You know, there are a lot of different ways to bring your baby or child into your life or into your world. It's also very easy for people who haven't experienced infertility to judge other people's situations and decisions, and I think every couple is entitled to do what's best for them and their family and their situation. Adoption isn't for everyone. I think people just need to be kinder and more understanding towards people and how they choose to create their family. Just less judgment and more kindness, more understanding that these decisions are not easy decisions to make. That was a very long-winded answer, and I'm sorry. I need to move on. What do you do for work? I work full-time as an office manager for a mineral water company. How do you manage your job and fertility treatment at the same time? Tips. Does your boss and co-workers know? When would you recommend telling people at work? Yes, my boss and co-workers know. As you guys know, I'm very open about sharing. Not everyone at my work knows though. The people in the office know, and there's not many of us. The business I work for is owned by Tim's sister, so she has known. Juggling work with IVF has been pretty easy. With this third IVF cycle, I knew when I was doing it and when I'd need time off, so I just trained someone to do my job while I was away, and we just prepared that way. And so that took the pressure off. I could just take off as many days as I needed, and I think it is helpful that people know. But obviously not all workplaces are like that, and sometimes there are people you work with that you don't want to know, and there are people at my work that I don't talk about it with, but I think, I don't know, I think do what you feel comfortable with. If you can take time off without having to tell everyone or your boss why, perhaps do that and just share as much or as little as you feel comfortable with sharing. Really, it's none of their business if you don't need to tell them all the details if you don't want to, or if you don't feel comfortable with doing that, if you can get the time off without having to do that. But yeah, I totally get that it can be really hard. I'm lucky in that respect. Tim's also got a really understanding boss who allows him to have time off when needed, so that's been really good as well. Gosh, the sun is seriously setting, can you tell? I am going to have to do a third Q&A. I'm sorry everyone, but I can't get to all the questions. Hopefully I'll get that up for you really soon. Best of luck to you all for wherever you are in your journeys. I'll speak to you guys in the next video. Bye!